Hello. People don't just lose things. Not the things that matter. Not the things they wear every day without thinking. You can forget a coffee cup, misplace a pair of sunglasses, maybe even leave your keys in the wrong pocket. But a wedding ring? That's not something that just disappears. I didn't think much of it at first. I wasn't the kind of guy to get suspicious over small things, and I never thought I had a reason to question my wife, Rachel. We had been married for 6 years, together for almost 10, and while we weren't in that honeymoon phase anymore, I had always thought we were solid. Routine, comfortable, predictable, the kind of life that didn't come with big surprises. I work at a service station, spending most of my days under cars, covered in grease and oil, dealing with people who either know exactly what's wrong with their vehicles or have no idea what they're even driving. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work, and it kept our life steady. Rachel, on the other hand, worked in an office, a marketing firm she had been with for a few years. She had always been more social than me, the kind of person who could strike up a conversation with anyone, who always seemed to have plans, events, reasons to be out and about. I had never questioned it before. Then, one night, Rachel came home acting off. It wasn't anything obvious, just little things, details I wouldn't have even noticed if they weren't out of place. She hesitated at the door for a second before coming inside, like she was making sure she looked normal. She kissed me like she always did, asked about my day, and went straight upstairs. I didn't think much of it, until later that evening, when she casually mentioned that she had lost her wedding ring. At first, I laughed, thinking she was joking, but then I saw her face, the way she twisted her fingers, the way she avoided looking at me. She said it so casually, so carelessly, like it was just another item she had misplaced. Rachel wasn't the type to be careless with her ring. I remember when I first put it on her finger, how she had held her hand up, admiring it, saying she'd never take it off. Over the years, she had been careful with it, always taking it off when she put on lotion, always placing it in the same spot at night. She liked wearing it. So, to hear that she had just lost it, that didn't sit right with me. She brushed it off quickly, saying she must have taken it off at work and forgotten where she put it. Maybe it was in her desk, maybe in her bag. She'd find it. I didn't push. Not then, but something about it stuck with me. The next morning, she left for work like usual. Same routine, same rushed goodbye, same confident stride out the door. But I watched her hands as she grabbed her keys, saw the way she glanced down at them, her bare finger twitching ever so slightly. She didn't seem worried that the ring was gone. She seemed relieved. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. I didn't say anything. Not yet. Instead, I did what I do best. I paid attention, and slowly little cracks started to appear in the life I thought I knew. Rachel had always been social, always had plans, always had somewhere to be. But now, I started noticing how vague she was about it. The late nights at work, the sudden interest in going out with friends she never mentioned by name, the way she started dressing just a little nicer for casual nights out. It could have been nothing, but now, I wasn't so sure. Because when people lose things that matter, they look for them. And Rachel? She wasn't looking for that ring at all. People misplace things all the time. A phone, a wallet, a set of keys. Small things that slip between couch cushions or get left behind in a rush. But a wedding ring? That's not something you just lose. Rachel had always been careful with hers. She wore it like it was part of her skin, twisting it absent-mindedly when she talked, tapping it against the table when she was deep in thought. She used to joke that she felt naked without it, that she'd rather forget her phone than leave the house without it. So when she casually mentioned that she had lost it, something didn't sit right. It was a regular evening, nothing out of the ordinary. I had just gotten home from work at the service station, hands still smelling like oil and grease, expecting nothing more than a quiet night. Rachel was already there, scrolling through her phone on the couch. When I walked in, she looked up, smiled, and said, "Oh, by the way, I lost my ring." Just like that. No panic, no frustration, just a passing comment, like she had misplaced a pair of sunglasses. I asked where she thought she lost it, and she just shrugged. "Probably at work," she said. "Maybe in my car." But she didn't look for it. That was the first red flag. Rachel wasn't the kind of person to lose something important, especially not something she had worn every single day for the past 6 years. If she had really misplaced it, she would have been tearing the house apart, retracing her steps, searching every corner of her car. But she didn't. She just shrugged it off and went back to scrolling on her phone. I told myself I was overthinking it. People lose things, right? Maybe it really did slip off somewhere, and she just wasn't as worried about it as I thought she should be. But the feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. And then, 2 days later, everything clicked into place. It was an average afternoon at work. The station was busy, a steady flow of customers coming in for oil changes, tire rotations, the usual maintenance. I had just finished up with one car when another pulled into the bay. A sleek, dark sedan, the kind of car that screamed, expensive but discreet. I barely glanced at the driver as he stepped out, handing me his keys. "Oil change," he said, before heading to the waiting area. I got to work. Same routine as always. But as I slid into the driver's seat to check the mileage, something caught my eye. A small, metallic glint between the seat and the center console. I reached down, expecting loose change, maybe a lost earring. But when I pulled it out, my breath caught in my throat. A wedding ring. Not just any ring. Rachel's ring. I knew it instantly. The weight of it, the engraving inside the band. Her initials. Our wedding date. The ring she had supposedly lost. Only, it wasn't in her office. It wasn't in her car. It was in his. My pulse pounded in my ears as I gripped the ring, staring at it like it might burn a hole through my hand. My stomach twisted, a slow, sinking realization creeping over me. Rachel hadn't lost her ring. She had taken it off. In his car. My mind raced, trying to piece together what this meant, though deep down, I already knew. This wasn't some misunderstanding. This wasn't just a coincidence. She had been in this car. She had been with him. And she had left behind the one thing that tied her to me. I glanced toward the waiting area, where the driver sat scrolling through his phone, completely unaware that the mechanic working on his car was her husband. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to think. I could storm in there right now, demand answers, throw the ring in his face. But that would give him control. That would turn me into the fool, the raging husband causing a scene in public. No, I wasn't going to lose my temper. I wasn't going to let emotion take over. I was going to be smart. Without a second thought, I slipped the ring into my pocket. I finished the oil change, checked the tires, made sure everything was in perfect condition. Then, when the driver came back to pay, I handed him his keys with the same steady hands I always had. I even smiled, because now, I had proof. Now, I knew. Rachel had left her wedding ring in another man's car, and she had no idea that I was the one who found it. Rachel moved through the kitchen with the confidence of someone who had just dodged a bullet. Her shoulders were relaxed, her smile easy, the picture of a wife with nothing to hide. She set the ring on the counter for a moment, turning to pour herself a glass of water, as if this was just another ordinary evening, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. She had no idea that I had already found her ring days ago, that I had pulled it from the passenger seat of another man's car, clenched it in my fist, and forced myself to act normal. She had no idea that every move she had made since then had been carefully observed, analyzed, stored away in my mind as I pieced together the full story. And now, she had made her boldest move yet. She had replaced the ring. It was a calculated risk, but not a desperate one. It was the move of someone who believed they were still in control, someone who thought they could manipulate reality itself if they were just careful enough. But she had underestimated me. I turned the fake ring over in my hands, my fingers tracing the engraving inside the band. The difference was unmistakable. Rachel's real ring had been custom-made, carefully designed, every detail chosen with purpose. The engraving had been delicate, cursive, meaningful. But the one in my hands was all wrong. The font was too sharp, the depth too shallow, the letters too neatly spaced in a way that felt machine-pressed rather than crafted with care. It was an imitation, close enough to fool a quick glance, but a failure upon closer inspection. She must have realized, after losing it, that she couldn't just keep pretending. Maybe she had panicked after a few days of not finding it, knowing that eventually, I would ask. Maybe she had assumed I had already noticed its absence. Either way, she had gone out and done the only thing she thought would solve the problem. She had replaced it and hoped I wouldn't look too closely. She thought she had one. I played along. Rachel slid the ring onto her finger with a small, practiced motion, a silent confirmation to herself that this was over, that she had successfully rewritten reality. She admired it briefly, turning her hand under the light, making sure it looked natural, as if she hadn't been walking around without it for days. I watched the scene unfold, memorizing every second of it. She wasn't relieved that she had found the ring. She was relieved that I had accepted her story without question. That was the difference. She wasn't happy that a missing sentimental item had been returned, because it hadn't. The real ring was still upstairs in my drawer, tucked away like a secret she never intended to uncover. The weight of her deception settled into my chest, not as anger, but as clarity. This was who she was. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a moment of weakness that she would one day confess in tears, saying she had been lost, confused, struggling. No, this was strategy. This was planning. This was manipulation. She had taken off her ring in another man's car. That much was already clear. But the replacement, the ease with which she had fabricated an entirely new reality, that was what truly unsettled me. This wasn't the act of someone caught up in a fleeting moment of passion. This was the act of someone who knew exactly what she was doing, who had been living a double life for far longer than I had suspected. The worst part wasn't even the affair. It was the confidence with which she believed she could erase it. Rachel moved around the kitchen like she had already moved past the moment, her posture light, her focus shifting to other things. It was done. The problem had been solved. The story had been rewritten, and now we could all move on as if nothing had happened. I let her believe that. I let her bask in her false victory, in the idea that she had once again outmaneuvered the situation, because I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. I wanted to see how far she would take it. Would she keep slipping out for her errands with the same confidence? Would she keep coming home late, thinking I was still oblivious? Would she continue to walk around with that ring on her finger, believing she had erased her own betrayal? I wanted to know, so I stayed quiet. I let her think I was none the wiser. And while she went about her life, convinced she had everything under control, I was already preparing for the moment when she would realize she had lost everything. Because when I finally revealed what I knew, I wanted her to feel the exact same shock I had felt when I pulled her real wedding ring from another man's car. I wanted her to know what it felt like to have the ground ripped out from under her feet. And when that moment came, there wouldn't be a single thing she could do to stop it. Some moments in life are too perfect to be a coincidence. They feel orchestrated, as if the universe is deliberately revealing something you were never supposed to see. That's exactly how it felt the day I drove past Rachel's office and saw his car parked outside. I hadn't planned on stopping. I was just running errands, killing time before heading home, playing the part of the oblivious husband while I continued to gather every piece of evidence I needed. But as I passed her office building, something made me slow down. And that's when I saw it. The sleek, dark sedan sitting in the visitor lot. The same car that had pulled into my service station a few days ago. The same car where I had found her wedding ring wedged between the passenger seat and the console. My stomach tightened. I wasn't looking for more proof. I already had enough. But the moment I saw that car, I knew I couldn't just drive past. Something inside me told me to stop. So I did. I turned into the lot and parked a few rows away, keeping my distance. The car was empty, which meant he was inside. Rachel was supposed to be at work, just another ordinary day at the office. But if that was the case, why was he here? I didn't have to wait long to get my answer. 15 minutes later, the front doors to the office building swung open, and there she was. Rachel. Not alone. With him. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as I watched them walk side by side, her body angled toward him, her expression light, happy. The kind of happiness I hadn't seen from her in months. She laughed at something he said, tilting her head just enough for me to see the way she looked at him. And then, right there, in the middle of the parking lot, she reached for his hand. I grabbed my phone, my movements slow, calculated, barely breathing as I hit record. She held his hand like it was second nature, fingers intertwined with his, completely oblivious to the fact that she was being watched. They strolled toward his car like they had done this 100 times before, No hesitation, no second thoughts. And then, she kissed him. Not a quick goodbye, not a peck on the cheek. A slow, lingering kiss. Right there. In broad daylight. In front of her office. I kept the camera steady, capturing every second of it. By the time they pulled apart, laughing like two love-struck teenagers, I had everything I needed. I didn't move. I just sat there, watching as he unlocked the car and she slipped into the passenger seat. The same seat where I had found her wedding ring. As they drove away, I exhaled slowly, my pulse steady, my hands calm. I had proof. More than I ever expected. But I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. I was going to let her keep lying. Let her keep pretending. Let her dig herself even deeper. And when the moment was right, when she thought she had everything under control, I would destroy the fantasy she had built piece by piece. I had everything I needed. More than enough proof to end this in an instant. But I didn't just want an ending. I wanted a lesson. Rachel had spent months, maybe years, weaving her web of lies, living two lives, carefully crafting a version of reality where she was untouchable. She thought she had gotten away with it. She thought I was still the trusting, oblivious husband, too blind to see what was right in front of me. She needed to feel what I felt. That creeping doubt, that paranoia, that gnawing sensation in the back of your mind when something isn't right, but you can't quite put your finger on it. So, I decided to give her a taste of her own medicine. I hired a few actors, professionals who specialized in public pranks, subtle psychological games. People who could deliver a message without ever making it clear where it was coming from. I gave them a simple job. At different points in Rachel's day, without warning, they would approach her and say something cryptic. Just a few words. Nothing aggressive. Nothing that could outright expose me. Just enough to make her question everything. The first strike happened at her favorite coffee shop. Rachel had a routine. Every morning, like clockwork, she stopped by the same cafe before heading to work. It was part of her ritual, a moment of normalcy before the day began. She always ordered the same drink, always scrolled through her phone while she waited, completely in her own world. This time, as she reached for her coffee, an older woman stepped beside her and whispered just loud enough to be heard. "He knows everything." Then she turned and walked away, leaving Rachel frozen in place. She didn't tell me about it when she got home that night, but I could see something had shifted. She was distracted, distant in a way she hadn't been before. Her eyes flickered toward me more often, like she was studying me, trying to figure out if something had changed. She didn't know if she should be nervous yet, but the seed had been planted. The second strike came 2 days later. Rachel was at lunch with a friend, one of her usual midweek outings, where she played the role of the loving wife while texting him under the table. I knew exactly where she would be. As she and her friend chatted, a man in his 20s, dressed casually, walked past their table. He barely paused, barely looked at her. "Tell him," he murmured as he passed. Just those 2 words. Rachel's friend wouldn't have thought anything of it. A random phrase from a stranger, something meaningless. But she would feel it. That night, she barely spoke at dinner. She kept looking at her phone, reading and rereading something that wasn't there. She was waiting for me to say something, to give her some kind of sign that I knew. But I stayed silent. She was unraveling, and I wasn't even touching the thread. The final strike came when she was shopping. Rachel had always been the type to de-stress with retail therapy, browsing stores with no real purpose, just something to clear her mind. She was walking through a boutique, flipping through racks of clothing, when an older man approached her, glancing at her hand. "It's not a real ring," he said casually, nodding toward the one she had been pretending was hers. Then he walked away. This time, she reacted. She ripped the ring off her finger, staring at it like it had betrayed her. Her breath came out in short, uneven bursts, panic creeping into her eyes. And that's when I knew. She wasn't just feeling watched. She was feeling hunted. She still didn't know who was behind it. She didn't know if Ryan had told someone. She didn't know if Jason, her other lover, had slipped up. She didn't know if I knew. And that uncertainty? That was exactly what I wanted her to feel. I didn't need to confront her. She was already confronting herself. Rachel had been unraveling for days. The paranoia had settled deep inside her, and I could see it in every movement, every flicker of hesitation in her eyes. She wasn't sure what was real anymore. The whispers, the messages, the strangers who seemed to know too much. It had broken something inside her. She wasn't sleeping well. She checked her phone obsessively, scrolling through old conversations, probably searching for signs that someone had betrayed her. She studied me when she thought I wasn't looking, trying to figure out if I knew anything, if I had changed. I hadn't. I had stayed exactly the same. And that terrified her more than anything. She was waiting for me to snap, waiting for me to ask questions, waiting for the confrontation. But she had no idea that I had already planned everything. That morning, I filed for divorce. I made sure everything was in order: legal documents, financial assets, property arrangements. By the time I walked out of my lawyer's office, Rachel was already erased from everything that mattered. She just didn't know it yet. That night, I told her I had planned something special. A date night. Something we hadn't done in a while. Something to reconnect. She hesitated for only a second before forcing a smile, agreeing like it was perfectly normal. Of course, she said yes. She wanted to believe she could fix this. She wanted to believe she was still in control. The restaurant was one of those high-end places with dim lighting and expensive wine lists, the kind Rachel always loved to post about on social media. When we arrived, she was all smiles, playing the role of the loving wife, carefully watching me for any cracks in my facade. I gave her nothing. We ordered drinks, small talk, a perfectly normal evening. I let her relax, let her believe for a little longer that everything was okay. Then, dessert arrived. A single slice of cake, elegantly plated, placed in front of her with a careful, deliberate touch. Rachel glanced at it, then at me, slightly confused. There was no candle, no decoration, just something small, glinting softly under the dim restaurant lights. She leaned forward, and that's when she saw it. Nestled in the soft layers of cake was a ring. Not the fake one she had been wearing. Not a replacement. Her real wedding ring. The one I had taken from the car of the man she had been sleeping with. Rachel's breath hitched, her fingers tightening around the fork she had been holding. Her face paled, her body stiffening as she stared at the undeniable proof of her own betrayal. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, pulling the ring from the cake, wiping away the frosting as if clearing it would somehow change the reality in front of her. And then, just as she was processing that, the waiter returned. Not with the bill, with an envelope. He placed it neatly in front of her, nodding politely before walking away, leaving her frozen in place. Slowly, she picked it up, her fingers leaving small smudges of frosting on the paper. She opened it with hesitant, jerky movements, as if she already knew what was inside but was desperately hoping she was wrong. Then, she saw it. The divorce papers. Everything was there. Her name, my name, the terms, the signatures. Everything already set in motion. By the time she looked up at me, I was already standing. I didn't need to say a word. Her expression, shattered, panicked, trapped, was enough. She had spent months lying, sneaking around, controlling the narrative. Now, the story was mine to tell. I gave her one last look before turning away, walking out of the restaurant, leaving her alone with nothing but her cold dessert and the end of everything she thought she controlled. Bye-bye.